Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Today we are going to talk about modern day book burnings. Remember the old-fashioned book burnings where the whole neighborhood comes out, starts a bonfire, everyone throws their books in it, roasts marshmallows. It was a lot of fun, carnival atmosphere. That was back in the day. Today we have a different way of doing it. Same result in the end. Somewhere between, I've heard different numbers, I wish I could give a more definitive number here, but it's somewhere between 50 and 85% of all books are sold on Amazon, and really up until recently, 100% of the books I ever bought were on Amazon. If Amazon refuses to sell books on a certain topic, then the publishers just won't publish those books because they'd be losing their giant, the main way that they sell them, right? So they're just not gonna print them at all. Amazon has a ton of cultural power here because of their near monopoly. I say this because Amazon just decided that they will not sell any books that frame LGBTQ+ as a mental illness, particularly the T, the transgenderism. And even though transgenderism is indeed a mental illness, the true story is that no one wants to hear this, but the true story is gender dysphoria, gender confusion, is listed in the American Psychological Association's book. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the authoritative guide of mental disorders, of mental illness. This is the list. It's 1,000 pages. And gender dysmorphia is there. So it is a mental illness. But why then won't Amazon sell a book like Ryan T. Anderson's When Harry Became Sally? Why? Because conservatives want to help people with gender dysphoria live as comfortably as they can in their true sex. But the current cultural treatment, culturally acceptable treatment to gender dysmorphia is to pump your kids full of hormones, mutilate their genitalia, and surgically remove a fully functioning uterus. Now I would like to I got some questions about that, or I'd like to raise a little bit of an objection to that course of treatment. But you're not allowed. You can't even sell books that accurately depict transgenderism as a mental health issue. Now you could sell books that lie about it, of course. You could sell books directly to kids about transgenderism. You can do that. Tell the truth, though, you're banned. Tell the truth, you're banned. Lie, no problem. Promote it even. If you don't see a problem with that, I'm not sure what to do for you. So, those who do see a problem with it, like me and you, what do? First thing, read banned books. Right? I don't know how often you read. Maybe you want to get back into reading. Maybe you want to read more. You don't know where to start. I'll tell you where to start. Read banned books. Books that people want banned, that's where you start. This one in particular that we're talking about here is When Harry Became Sally by Ryan T. Anderson. Second thing, be careful on how things are framed. Be careful of language, because where they don't ban entire books or topics of books, they ban words and change words. And you know it matters because they do it all the time. This is from a transgender activist, all right? Try to wrap your head around this. This is mind-blowing here. So this is a transgender activist writing to Ryan T. Anderson. Here's what he said. Yes, Ryan, every major medical organization has explicitly labeled conversion therapy, we'll get to that in a second, conversion therapy for trans people unethical. You're the only one having this debate. Medical organizations are unanimous. Attacking me personally is not going to change that reality. Okay, so that is a beautifully delusional comment. Masterful in language manipulation. So follow me here. Teenage girl goes to see a therapist for gender dysmorphia, okay? Gender confusion. Uncomfortable in her body, right? The therapist seeks to help this girl feel comfortable as a girl. That's now called conversion, right? But if that therapist recommends that we give that girl high doses of testosterone and a double mastectomy, that is affirmation. That's gender affirmation. We're affirming her true gender as a boy. Do you see that? You see how messed up that is? So your daughter comes to you and says she wants to be a boy, whatever, and you help your daughter see that she is in fact a girl, then you're engaging in conversion therapy. And that's a terrible, horrible, evil thing. But if you say, oh yes, you're right, daughter, you're a boy. Let's mutilate your anatomy, remove your uterus, and give you hormones so you grow a beard and make you infertile for the rest of your life. That's not conversion. No, that's not, that's affirmation and kind and compassionate. We've lost our minds. But you see how it's backwards? You get it? That's the art of it. The Bible says this is what's going to happen, by the way. I'm going to call good evil, evil good. Nothing, like everyone's scared to tell the truth. Everyone is so scared. I'll give you an example. Richard Levine, he was born in 1957 in Massachusetts. Went to Hebrew school, had a bar mitzvah, went to a nice prep school. He was the linebacker on the high school football team. Went to Harvard undergrad, went to med school at Tulane, got married, went on to have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. 8 years after graduating, Richard started living as a woman and is now Rachel and is Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary of Health, number 2 at the Health and Human Services. People are scared to call Rachel he, let alone call him Richard. And this is why you get sentences like this. I read this in the news. She has 2 children from his marriage to Martha. What? Washington Post wrote a story about Rachel Levine's office in Pennsylvania. Dr. Levine was the Pennsylvania's top doctor, right? So Rachel Levine's office has all these family photos, including one from a vacation long ago when her children were young and she was a broad-shouldered man named Richard. We're like, and we're like, people type these things out and we just read them and we just like pretend like this is normal, this is fine, no problem here. You cannot win a debate if the other person controls the language. I know Jesse and Buck like to use this analogy of sports, right? So your basketball team's March Madness. You're a basketball team and you go and you play the game, like we have the rules and there's refs and you play the game, right? But imagine if it's not only home court advantage, the other team's home court advantage, but the other team owns the refs and they just change the rules in the middle of the game. Okay? You can't win that game. It's impossible to win that game. And that's what's happening here. They're just changing language. When people can see that he is a she or that Richard is Rachel, it's over. And if you call Richard Rachel or a he a she, you can think all day long that you're being compassionate, right? But just know also that you're reinforcing the idea that Richard, a linebacker, husband and father of 2, can become Rachel by sheer force of will. That a man can become a woman just by that's. Declan Leary wrote an article, he said, we deny reality for the sake of civility. We deny reality for the sake of civility. At what cost? He says we suspend what we know to be true for what? For fear of being called bigots by the editors of Vox? And so many people are willingly giving up truth. For what? You cannot change genders. It's impossible. Unless one day we can go into someone's genes and change their chromosomes from XX to XY, you cannot change someone's gender. I don't care if you mutilate someone's genitalia or wear a dress, you cannot change your gender. This is a mental issue of the brain. That's where this issue needs to be dealt with. And your affirmation in the name of compassion, especially to kids, can ruin their lives. There's so many stories coming out now. There's gonna be many more. On my radio show today, actually, we're talking with someone who runs an organization of people who have detransitioned, right? So there's tons of stories out there of people who have detransitioned. So people who had born a woman, let's say, a girl, had some emotional issue and some abusive trauma in their life, and different emotional issues from that. were confused, had gender dysmorphia, a mental illness, and then were pushed into changing their gender, and then later realized that what a huge mistake this was, and have detransitioned back to their actual gender. And now they're angry at everyone in their life and frustrated at doctors and therapists who they trusted, who never asked what was really at the root of their confusion in the first place. Never asked about the trauma in their life that could have caused this dysmorphia. And the reason that doctors and therapists never touched this and never got to the root of the issue is because if they did, they'd be accused of being in favor of conversion therapy. They'd be accused of being transphobic and abusive, right? So helping a girl be comfortable in her body is abusive, it's violent. No, instead we need to have a double mastectomy to remove her uterus and pump her with testosterone. That's compassionate? No, listen, of course I admit this is a tricky situation, but to pretend that the solution is surgery and hormones, that's to take the easy way out, but you're not even getting out, right? Right? So you say it's the easy way out, but you're not out. You're still in the same trauma that you were in before. You just piled on more. And that's what you're a part of if you continue to play their language game. I'll give you one more point. This is New York Post. Mississippi governor signs bill to ban transgender athletes from women's sports. No, don't watch the word transgender, because people don't even really know what that means, right? If you're a transgender woman, I don't know what that, like, if you're born one, like what's a transgender man? There's men and women, that's it. There's no transgender man, there's just you're man or a woman. So this bill from Mississippi, and other states are joining in, the headline should say, this bill bans men from participating in women's sports. See how they cloud the issue? Oh, this would ban transgender athletes from, and you're like, what? No, it bans men from participating in women's sports. Watch your language. And you know what the left does if you decide not to play their games? You know what they do? They call you a bigot. They call you transphobic. They call you a Nazi. They call you names. They shame you. You're an idiot. You're backwards. Get with the times. You're a murderer. You're contributing to the violence against transgender people. My favorite tactic, and here's an example from AOC. Why do you obsess? Ugh. Conservatives, stop obsessing. It's weird and gross. Ew. And as Michael Tracy said, you're introducing a massive societal change virtually overnight, affecting an endless array of private and public interactions, and then accuse us of obsessing? This came out of nowhere. I distinctly remember the day when transgender bathrooms became an issue, and everyone in the country was like, what? Where is this coming from? Also, if you throw the tweet back up from AOC, don't overlook the opening line of that tweet. Trans kids. Trans kids are awesome, incredible. Trans kids? Like, that's what I mean. Like, we're just supposed to go along with, like, oh yeah, trans kids. Trans kids? What do you mean trans kids? Like, 2 years ago, there was such thing as trans kids. And now we're just supposed to be like, oh yeah, right, trans kids are wonderful. What are trans kids? What are you talking about? Here's the deal. You, if you haven't already, and do it again if you have to have a conversation with your kids about gender. I don't care what age they are. Tell your kids the true story. There are two genders. People who think they are of a different gender are confused, and their confusion usually comes from a trauma, a pain, a hurt, an abandonment, some host of other issues. We need to love them as a person. But you cannot change your gender. All of a sudden, I'm just being tolerant. No. At what cost? You let the activists convince you that you can people can change genders, and that we should just, oh yeah, trans kids. You let activists do that, and there's nothing that they can't convince you of. There's nothing they can't convince you. There's nothing they can't convince you to follow them on. If you follow them on this, that men can turn into women and women can turn into, there's nothing that you won't follow them on. You think you'll draw the line, but you won't. If you haven't drawn the line on this, you're not going to draw the line on anything else. There's no bridge too far past this one. And one of the main reasons why people are falling for it is because they've weaponized compassion against you. So while nearly everyone else is falling for it, you stand for the truth. I got another segment coming up about language as well. Professor Vincent Racaniello is going to be here, talk about the latest with COVID, and then John Phillips is going to be here. We'll talk about Cuomo being kicked out and Newsom in California being recalled. Glad you're here. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to talk about political correctness and why they keep changing the language. One of the reasons why Trump got elected 4 years ago was because people, and you and me, were so frustrated about with political correctness, right? It was everything. And it started off with silly things like, it's no longer called a manhole cover, it's now called a sewer cover, or like dumb things like that, right? But then it started to get more serious and really, really encroaching on your freedom of thought. So one of the reasons, I really think it's one of the reasons why people voted for Trump, because he didn't care about any of that stuff. So we had 4 years where political correctness obsession was paused, sort of. Like, at least you could say Merry Christmas. But now Trump's gone and the PC floodgates are back open. I have 3 examples I want to share here of political correctness when it comes to race. And my suggestion is do not fall for them. And then we'll tell the true story about what we should do next, people who care about the truth. So the theme of the show today has really been on language, and you need to watch it. So this is a professor at the University of Dayton who ranked law schools based on their total whiteness. And he demanded that these schools eliminate their excess whiteness from their campuses and their programs, okay? Too much whiteness. We need to eliminate excess whiteness. By the way, quick sidebar, on my local show in San Diego, we've been talking about California's new ethnic studies curriculum, which is atrocious and horrific and full of true pagan worshiping of Aztec gods. It is crazy. But one of the authors of the early American history section of the curriculum wrote this other book where he talked about the need for counter-genocide. Right? So the white man came over and committed genocide against the indigenous peoples. So now we need a counter-genocide against white people. But that's fine. He's only writing the curriculum for California schools. So when you start hearing things like counter-genocide and excess whiteness, like that's a problem. So when I heard about white law schools and ranking them based on their whiteness, right? That's the key word today, whiteness. I just thought they took the number of, white people and divided it by the number of people in the school and which schools have more white people than other schools and which schools have more people of color or whatever. That's not all it was. It was that, but that's not all it was. Because it wasn't just white, it's whiteness. So it's not just white people, it's whiteness. What's whiteness? Whiteness is white culture. Okay, well, what's white culture? It's a couple different things. One of them is standardized testing. So any standardized testing, or more broadly, norm reference grading. What does that mean? Objective standards. Any objective standard is white culture, is whiteness, and we need to remove it from our society. What's an objective standard? Showing up on time? That's white culture. Whiteness means Western civilization, which is very bad. And it's any standard. Anytime there's a standard, it's white supremacy. Why? The root of this is it's really people who can't meet the standard. It's people who have not been able to meet the standard and they're bitter, right? So they got sour grapes, and instead of striving to meet the standards, they just tear down the concept of standard. But how do you tear down the concept? Like, how do you argue against the idea of having standards, right? We just call them racist. You call standards whiteness and white supremacy. Therefore, if you're white and for standards, then you're racist and oppressive. Like, what, Slater, what is it? What are you talking about? Let me give you a laughable example and then a serious one. Right? This is an article written by a black woman, published on Medium, called "I'm Not Rushing to Get to Work on Time Anymore. If it's not about me and my peace of mind, it can wait." So she writes about how she wakes up at 7 a.m. She doesn't use an alarm clock. She lets herself rise naturally with the sun. Talk about privilege. She stretches, sits up, takes a sip of water, says a little prayer of gratitude, gets out of bed, opens up the curtain, and then panics because the countdown has begun. Here's what she said. Starting from the moment I opened my eyes, I have T-minus 2.5 hours before I need to start work. That's 2.5 hours to become fully awake, do some yoga, walk around my neighborhood, meditate and pray, journal about my over-anxious thoughts, take a shower, dress, clean up my place, make me some breakfast, all the things I want and need to do to get energized and feel like a human before I have to sit down to start my work for the day. Of course, it is almost impossible to get all this done within that window of time. Holy cow! 2.5 hours? You can't get to work in 2.5. I just think of like a farmer. Like I didn't think of any farmer. They wake up, I gotta go feed the cow, milk the cows. I only got 2.5 hours to get ready. I don't know if I'm gonna make it in time. 2.5 hours. And she says sometimes she just can't get it all done, so sometimes she doesn't shower. That's the one, that's the ball that she drops, is the showering. And she says, I know I'm not alone. Black women especially struggle with prioritizing ourselves, but you are important. You are your best thing, because if you're not good, nothing is good. And the whole article, it's just this super self-help, pagan idol worship at the altar of me, myself and I, my self-care, all of it justifying showing up to work late. That's all it is. There's a standard, you gotta show up at 9:30, okay, lady? You gotta be working at 9:30. Why? Because we pay you. We pay you to be here at 9:30, okay? You don't wanna be here at 9:30, then don't work here, and you don't get paid. It's your decision, okay? But we pay you, you gotta be here at 9:30. Oh, I don't wanna be here at 9:30. Yeah, no one wants to be here at 9:30, but that's the deal, okay? Now, to someone who doesn't wanna be there, that's a standard, right? Showing up on time. Literally, when you go to these diversity, inclusion, equity seminars at your work or school, they have a slide. It says aspects of white supremacy, and there's a bunch of them. The Smithsonian released a bunch of these too. One of them is showing up on time. Okay, I'm not making this up, all right? So I don't want to show up on time. Yeah, no one wants to show up on time. But this woman just says, oh, it's racist. Making me show up on time is racist. Black women, especially, shouldn't be expected to show up to work on time because self-care is so important. Have you ever heard a more entitled thing in your entire life? This woman is complaining because she can't get to work by 9:30? And it's racist if you demand her to. Okay, now that's a silly example, but I mean, kind of important, I guess. All right, here's one more to my point. This is Georgetown University. It's a law professor at Georgetown Law School. Talking to another colleague over a Zoom call, did not know she was being recorded. Here it is.
They were a bit jumbled.
Yeah.
It's the best way I can put it. It's like, okay, let me reason through that, what you just said, kind of thing. Yeah, right. Unfortunately. And you know what? I hate to say this. I end up having this, angst every semester that a lot of my lower ones are Blacks. Happens almost every semester. And it's like, oh, come on. Get some really good ones, but there are also usually some that are just plain at the bottom. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So I feel bad.
She got fired. Now, she got fired for that. Now, here's the thing. What if what that professor said is true? Does it even matter? What if most of her Black students are at the bottom of the class? Are you allowed to even mention that? Apparently not. Because she didn't celebrate that fact. She bemoaned it. She's like, oh, I hate that this is true. I get angst. Oh, I wish it wasn't, was her point. But it is. And you're saying, oh, it's because she's racist. Do you know the grading at Georgetown Law School is anonymous? It's anonymous grading. They don't know if they're grading papers from they don't know who the person is, let alone if they're white or Black student. It's as objective of a standard as you can get. Anonymous grading. And here's the results. And I'm going to mention it fired. Just because there's an equitable outcome in her class means that she is racist. Even if the grading is done without anonymous, doesn't matter. Even if Thomas Sowell and many others for decades have talked about the problems with and the unintended consequences of affirmative action. That if the two main ones are affirmative action mismatches students to the wrong caliber of school. So you have a student, let's say a black student who would be better at a second-tier school, but because of affirmative action, they get into Harvard, but they're behind. They're not academically ready for Harvard, so they fall behind. They'd be much better off if they went to a second-tier school and excelled, right? So there's a mismatch effect. And the other problem with affirmative action is, let's say a black student does get into Harvard Law School on their own merits. It gives people the wrong perception that they're only there because of affirmative action. But they're not. They're there on their own actual merit. So there's two genuine, legitimate problems with affirmative action like that. But you can't even touch it. And she got fired for stating a fact. Her reputation ruined as a racist for stating a fact that she herself said she hates that it's true. But it doesn't matter. We all have to pretend like nothing's wrong, right? I mean, there's a book out, it's an old book, about how it's about the last few years of the Soviet Union and how all the people and all the leaders knew that it was just a matter of time before this whole thing was going to collapse, but they all had to pretend like everything was fine. And we're in that same place today. Everyone's pretending like everything's just fine. Nothing to see here. Just a full-on societal collapse in front of our eyes. But most people don't see it because, again, the language changes faster than a normal person can keep up. Now, I got to go here because we got some great guests coming up, but all this sounds pretty Debbie Downer, but I don't think so. This is a great time to be alive. On my website, MikeSlater.locals.com, I put up the Abigail Adams quote that I love so much. And part of it is, she says, she wrote it to her husband, "These are the times in which a genius would wish to live. It's not in the calm of life that great characters are formed. Great necessities call out great virtues." So let's not be too negative about it. Let's identify what the problems are. But then what an honor to be a part of it so that we can fix it and we can call out the lies and look for the true story. It's up to us. It's up to you. Coming up next, we'll get the latest with COVID, and then we'll talk about kicking out Cuomo and recalling Newsom. Coming up next, True Story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.
People have to look inside themselves and say, and Governor Cuomo also, how effective is their leadership in leading the state under the circumstances that are there? But I do think that the women deserve to hear the results of these investigations, as does the governor.
Can he be an effective leader now?
No tolerance. No tolerance, and this is a subject very near and dear to my heart. This is no tolerance for sexual harassment. Let the world know that.
But you're not calling on him to resign right now?
I think we should see the results of but he may decide, and hopefully this result will be soon. What I'm saying is the governor should look inside his heart. He loves New York, to see if he can govern effectively.
Speaker,
and that could be one of the considerations that he has.
Oh, that's great. That's gold. Did she say the women need to wait for the results of the investigation? They should wait? That's good. John Phillips is here, host of KABC, writer at the Orange County Register. John, what's going on, brother?
Hey, good morning.
That's gold. I want to talk about Newsom in a minute, but let's start with Cuomo. I really haven't been following the Cuomo story much. So what's been going on? Get me up to speed.
Well, first it started out with the nursing home problem, where we had all of these people die in the nursing homes. And then he tried to cover it up when the Fed started poking around. Then all of the women started coming forward and saying, oh, this guy has all kinds of problems. And his defense seems to be, look, I'm not a pig. I'm not a sexist. I just treat everyone like crap. So if I treat everyone like crap, then I'm going to treat, half of the people I treat poorly will be women. And right now what you're seeing is Democrats in New York come after him And Democrats nationwide are saying essentially what Pelosi said. Kamala Harris and President Biden are saying the same thing. The problem for him is how he treats people personally. He's very disrespectful to virtually everyone he encounters. So if you have to encounter him on a regular basis, you probably hate his guts. But on paper, he's just a partisan Democrat doing partisan Democratic things. So it's easier for people like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden to punt. They're also hedging their bets because they saw what happened in Virginia with Ralph Northam, where he just dug in his heels and said, I'm not going anywhere. And he survived. The difference between him and Cuomo is that Democrats in Virginia seem to like working with him, whereas Democrats in New York State hate Cuomo's guts.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so Democrats there are seeing this as an opportunity to kick him out. So you're saying they want him gone just because they don't like him?
Democrats in New York, yes. But from Nancy Pelosi's point of view, from Joe Biden's point of view, Kamala Harris's point of view, they're fine either way. They don't need the guy to go yesterday.
Yes,
but if you're in the New York State legislature and the guy is just abusive to you on a regular basis, this is your opportunity to stick the knife in his back.
If he goes, surely they'll elect another Democrat, right, in New York as governor. There's no Republican governors in New York happening, right?
You never know. I mean, they did have George Pataki as governor, and you don't know who the Democrats are going to come up with. I mean, they're really, truly awful potential candidates. I mean, at one point in time, remember they were talking about running Caroline Kennedy for a U.S. Senate seat, and that blew up on takeoff. If suddenly they wake up tomorrow morning and decide that Chelsea Clinton's going to be the next governor of New York, may end up with a Republican.
All right, Anthony Weiner. Let's bring Weiner back from the dead. Okay, so what do you think he's going to do? What's your prediction?
I think he's going to dig in his heels because after the two U.S. senators, Gillibrand and Schumer, came out and said it's time to go, and a majority of Democrats in the congressional delegation came out and said it's time to leave, he hasn't said he's going anywhere. In fact, he said the exact opposite. So I take him at his word. I think if they want him gone, they're going to have to impeach him.
Well, as you said, Governor Blackface really set the tone, right? That's the exact thing to do. Just wait, right? Just wait.
Yeah, I've already noticed it this morning. I mean, that was all that was in the papers on Friday and even Saturday and Sunday. But this morning, they're all attacking Ron Johnson. They're going after the state of Florida. They're doing all kinds of other things. And, go to CNN.com. There's not much about Cuomo. They've moved on already.
Yeah. Are the accusations against him, the sexual accusations, very bad? Or again, is it more in the category of he's just a jerk?
Well, they run the gamut. I mean, some of them were just him, asking inappropriate questions. One woman claims that she was groped. That's more severe than the others. But, when you treat everyone like crap, then, you're bound to run the gamut, I would assume. Yeah. Disrespectful behavior seems to breed more disrespectful behavior. And I would note that a lot of these allegations have come over the last year. So after he became a TV star, suddenly he's this diva and it's mommy dearest in the governor's mansion. And, that being on TV and winning the Emmy and, all of those things was clearly bad for his interpersonal skills, which were lacking to begin with.
So these accusations, like these bad things, happened in the last year? These aren't from like 5-10 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
wow, that is an interesting... Yeah, that's an interesting human nature story that the fame got to him even more than it did in the past, as often is the case. All right, let's swing on the other side of the country to an equally dystopian state, the one that we live in. Amazing news, the signature recall, 2 million signatures. That we needed 1.5 million. They're going to check the signatures, so it looks like we'll still get over that 1.5 million threshold, which means Gavin Newsom, there'll be an election in August-ish. Do you think Newsom will be able to do any funny business in the courts or fine-toothing every signature to try and prevent this election from even taking place?
He may try, but I think he's going to move on and try to paint this as a partisan effort to remove him from office. That's going to be the storyline that he puts out there, but that's not reality. People are upset with the shutdowns. They're upset with the fact that trying to get a vaccine is like trying to get a Tickle Me Elmo on Christmas Eve. It shouldn't be like that.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, hold on. Stop. Listen, I think you're my favorite guest ever, right? We love having you every time. And every time we're guaranteed to have like 3 or 4 of those. That one wins. That is all. That is the best reference you've ever made. Sorry to cut you off. That's fantastic. Okay, so vaccine, tickle me elbow. Gotcha. Keep going.
Yeah, no, they're upset that EDD got fleeced for $11 billion plus. It's not a partisan effort to get rid of him. People are just angry at his poor leadership. And of course, all of that is personified by what happened at the French Laundry. There was a poll that just broke from Emerson College right before we went on the air, saying that only 42% of Californians would vote to keep him in office right now if the election were today. That is danger zone territory for Gavin Newsom. Another question was asked, like, would you prefer someone other than Gavin Newsom was governor, independent of the recall? And it was like 58% of Californians said yes. So he's going to have to tread very, very carefully as this recall campaign develops. And the storyline that this is a right-wing Republican effort to remove him from office, or a Donald Trump-led effort to remove him from office, is not going to work, especially if a big-name Democrat puts their name on the ballot. I think that will happen, and I think it's going to be one that either has prior elected office, maybe someone like Antonio Villaraigosa, or Tom Steyer, who just has billions of dollars.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question. Will they stick with Newsom? Will the party elite stick with Newsom, or will they throw him under the bus and put someone else in?
It depends on where the polling numbers are. This is the first time I've seen him poll this week. I think the last one was, 46% approval rating, which is nowhere near where Gray Davis was when he was recalled. That was in the 30s. But his number just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. And that State of the State address he just gave at Dodger Stadium was meant to be his kickoff campaign for fighting the recall. And clearly it's not working, given the results that we're seeing this morning.
Yeah, we got to run. I have a ton more questions. Let me just give you one last one on this, because we'll talk about Newsom more when it gets closer to it. But
Sure.
When Gray Davis was recalled in 2003, 55% of people voted to recall him. But I really think that's because Schwarzenegger was on the ballot and there was a lot of enthusiasm. Is there as much enthusiasm in a replacement candidate to get people out there to kick him out in the first place?
Well, we don't know who's going to make up the field. There will be more candidates this time than last time. There will be people with a legitimate chance, both Republicans and Democrats. And then there will be gadflies. You'll get the Angelines of the world, and you'll get any reality show star looking for publicity. But, there could be, what happens if Tom Hanks runs? What happens if The Rock runs? What happens if Condoleezza Rice runs? Like, nobody knows, because nobody knows who's going to take a look at the numbers and say, there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, very good. All right, John Phillips, KABC, and Orange County Register. You're the man, John. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, brother. Great stuff. Coming up next, Professor Vincent Racaniello. We'll get the latest with COVID and the AstraZeneca vaccine. Some places not using it anymore or something. Let's get the true story next. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, let's go to the source I trust. Professor Vincent Racaniello is the professor of virology at Columbia University. And you got to watch his podcast, This Week in Virology, microbe.tv. Hello, Professor. How do you do?
Good morning. New week. How's it going?
Indeed. Hopefully more good news. But I think I want to start off with a bunch of bad news, and hopefully you can give us the true story here. So Norway says they're pausing the AstraZeneca vaccine because of potential links between that and blood clots, even though they admit in their statement here that there is no proven link. First of all, do we have the AstraZeneca vaccine in America? And what do you think about the link between that and blood clots?
We do not have the AstraZeneca vaccine in the U.S. because they have not completed their phase 3 trial here. The U.S. FDA, Food and Drug Administration, requires you to test your vaccines in the United States. And so they're still in the process of doing that, and that's why we don't have it here yet. Now, the reports in a few countries that people have gotten blood clots are really not associated with the vaccine. They just happen. They're immunizing so many people, and people get blood clots. The frequency that this is happening happening along with the AstraZeneca vaccine is actually less than you would expect normally in people just having blood clots. So I think they're being overly cautious in these countries, and that's fine. But they do admit that they don't think the vaccine is the cause. And after having looked at it myself, I would agree. I don't think it has anything to do with the vaccine.
It could be. It's good to be cautious, but then also at the risk of getting people vaccinated quickly, which then definitely will hurt lives. So yeah, you could be too cautious. Okay, so here's the bad news that I saw this weekend. This is a headline: Germany declares a COVID third wave. All right. And then another one, 2/3 of Italians set for lockdown as pandemic worsens. I had to look at the dates of these articles. I was like, what was this, like back in like last, like May or so? What are we doing here? So what's going on in Italy and Germany?
Yeah, first you have to realize that the world isn't all the same with respect to infections, right? Every country is different. And even within the country, in the US, every state is different as far as who gets infected and how. So what's happening in parts of Italy and Germany, they're having a little uptick in infections. And I'm not surprised. This is going to happen on and off. They simply haven't vaccinated enough people, to prevent that yet. And there are little pockets here and there, and they're being cautious. They're saying, all right, let's shut down here and there. And I think that's fine. But I would not worry about it on a global sense because it's not happening here. It's not happening in many other countries.
What's your assessment of where we are in America? And I know it's a big question, right? There's a lot of different areas, but as you just said, but vaccine rollout going pretty well. Are we moving along in a good direction, you think?
Well, every state is different, as you know. I think the average in the U.S. is about 10% of people have gotten both doses of vaccine, and it differs according to state. Some states are higher, some states are lower. That's something that the states are going to have to work out on their own. But there is a push to get more vaccine out there, to have more manufacturing. The manufacturing is being cranked up. I think all that's good, and I think we're pretty on target to have all adults, 300 million adults, vaccinated by, say, the end of June. I think that's possible.
Is there a certain threshold or number of adults that would need to be? Here's why I asked this. I saw a link on the WHO, and it was back last year, and it said herd immunity is defined as the number of people who have a vaccine and/or have had the illness, like natural immunity. And then they changed it to just vaccine. A certain number of people have the vaccine. So what's your definition of herd immunity? What's the proper one? And what percentage do you think need to have either of those things before you would suggest to public health, oh, that's enough, we don't need to force the last 10% to get a vaccine? Or would you suggest that we require everyone to get one?
No, not everyone has to be vaccinated. Absolutely. That's what herd immunity is about. It's the immunity in a population that you need to stop spread of the virus. All right. Now, for SARS-CoV-2, it's somewhere between 50 and 70%. If we go higher, that's great, but I think we don't need to get higher than that. It's a combination of natural infections and vaccination. And remember, in the U.S., we are under-reporting infections. The last estimate from the CDC is about 5-fold. We're missing about 1 in 5 infections. And in some states, it's 1 in 10. So the amount of immunity is probably higher than we think it is. And I think that's why we're seeing a decrease in the U.S., because between the vaccination and the natural infections, which are way more than we think, I think we're starting to approach that level, maybe 50%. And you can see the number of infections going down.
So we're pro-vaccine, right? But you would not recommend that, like, because the state of California requires that every kid get like a polio vaccine and get all their vaccines before they go to school. Would you recommend something like that for the COVID vaccine?
Well, kids can't be vaccinated right now, right? Because they haven't been tested. The vaccine has not been tested in them. So we're not going to be able to vaccinate less than 18-year-olds before that happens, which is probably not going to be till later this year. On the other hand, if we can do most of the adults, then we will protect many of the kids. The adults are 300 million people. That's 90% of the U.S. population. And so that would protect the 10% that's not immunized, which would be the kids. And we don't even need to reach 90% immunity. So I think if we can get the adults done, 90, 80%, we're in good shape.
Great. We got about 60 seconds. Anything else we need to know, sir?
So on our last TWIV with Daniel Griffin, he made the point that infections in kids are being underreported. A lot more kids are being infected than we think, maybe as much as 1 in 10. And that's because kids don't get sick as well, so we don't test them. And they only shed for about 2 days. They only shed infectious virus for about 2 days. Now, why do I worry about this? So it's true that kids develop illness far lower frequency than adults, but they can still develop long COVID, right? Which means they can have long-term problems. And a lot of kids in high school are going back to sports after having a mild illness and they can't perform. So my message is be careful with the kids. They're not immune to long-term effects.
I haven't heard this term yet. Long COVID. So that's just the long-term effects, like lung effects mostly, I'm sure.
Lung, heart, mental issues, fatigue. We should talk about it sometime, but it's a real issue. And, you know, for young kids to have this, it could be a problem, obviously.
Okay. We got to run. I promise we will start off with that next week. I will make a note. Everyone go
All right.
watch the podcast, and you can get it before the professor joins us, microbe.tv. Professor, always grateful. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Yeah, you as well. Have a wonderful day. Love the professor. Microbe.tv. We'll do it again tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.